Hi, welcome. We are live in the WBMS conference room. If you haven't already, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notifications. And today we're interviewing the RAP artist, which RAP stands for Reading Appreciation Program for 2023, named Dusti Boy. How are you doing today?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing good. What is your education?
My education, well, I went to college, but I did not study writing, actually. I got degrees in psychology and education, and so I was a teacher for a little while.
What was your inspiration to become an author?
Well, I'd have to credit my inspiration with the authors I loved when I was a kid. So I fell in love with reading when I was in elementary school, and so many of the books I loved, like The Babysitter's Club by Anne Martin and Where the Red Fern Grows and Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark and a bunch of books like that, those authors made me fall in love with reading, and so I've carried that love of reading with me my whole life, and that is what really drives me to want to be an author, because it's the thought that I could create stories for children that would help make them fall in love with reading, and that they would always remember is really motivating to me. And that's also why I like to write middle grade so much, because it was middle grade books that made me fall in love with reading.
You said you did education when you got out of college. What were some of the schools you taught at?
Oh, well, I taught at a very small school in Pennsylvania, Windsor Christian Academy. First I started out in the preschool, then I became a substitute teacher, then I taught third grade, and then I moved, and then I didn't teach anymore after that.
What are some of the books you have written?
Well, my first book was Insignificant Events in the Life of a Cactus, and then 24 Hours in Nowhere, Momentous Events in the Life of a Cactus, which is the sequel to the first one, and The Canyon's Edge, Across the Desert, and then I have a new book, Dust, coming out, and I also have a chapter book series about Aven Green from the Cactus books, and there are 4 of those.
When is your book Dust coming out?
It comes out August 15th, 2023. I'm really excited about that one too.
I've read a little bit of the Insignificant Events in the Life of a Cactus, and I read The Canyon's Edge, both really good books.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I haven't gotten the chance to read the other ones yet.
That's okay.
What is your writing process when you're writing books?
Oh, well, it's pretty long and drawn out, so it takes me a very long time to work out a story idea. So usually for several months, if not years, I will have a story idea that will just be sort of like percolating in the back of my mind, that I'm always kind of thinking about, asking questions about, looking stuff up about. Eventually, I asked the question of, well, we're actually going to do a writing workshop on it tonight. Like, who is my main character and what is their story goal? What do they want more than anything in the world? And that usually starts to drive me to get to the heart of my story. And then after I kind of figure out who my main character is and what they want, I start to outline my story. I do outline my story, and I use frequently a method that I'm going to teach in the Story Beats workshop tomorrow called Save the Cat, which is a screenwriting method actually that works really well for me. And then once I outline it and I get all my most important parts figured out, then I write my first draft, which usually takes a few months. And then it's about 6 months of rewrites and revisions, and so it's a very long process before it's finally published.
When you write your books, do you know people that give you the inspiration of like what the person could be disabled with or like happens?
Yeah, so for Insignificant Events in the Life of a Cactus, I was inspired by a lot of people who I now do know, and I actually shared in my presentation today, there's several people I know: Barbie Thomas, who's a bodybuilder; Jessica Cox, who lives in Arizona where I live and has her pilot's license and can fly a plane with her feet. And I'm also fortunate that I've gotten to connect with a lot of these people, share my stories with them, and they give me a lot of feedback on whether they think Aven is realistic and accurate. And so they've been really kind to work with me on a lot of Aven related projects that I'm working on. And then for books like Dust, where my main character has really severe asthma. That actually runs in my family. We all have asthma, and it's actually why we originally moved to Arizona. Oh, and then Connor in the story, he has Tourette syndrome in the Cactus books, and he's inspired by my 19-year-old who has Tourette syndrome, and my husband and my other daughters also have tics. So it runs in my family there as well.
How long does it take for you to make each book?
So yeah, it's usually about a year to do a book. It doesn't mean I'm working like 8 hours a day on that book. I usually, when I'm writing a first draft and doing like heavy revisions, I usually can only do that for anywhere from 2 to 4 hours a day. And then I start to like, my brain just starts to like turn to mush, and I can't really, because I'm thinking so hard the whole time I'm writing, because I do find writing really hard actually. So I can't do like a regular 8-hour workday when it comes to writing. So yeah, about a year though of, working on it. When I'm doing that first draft for 3 months, it's usually, I'd say 3 to 4 hours of writing every day. And then the revisions are, they're like, they come in bursts. So I'll get like a 20-page editorial letter from my editor telling me all the terrible things about my book that need to be made better. And then I'll work hard on those for a month and then turn them in, and then a month later she'll send me another long editorial letter about all the things that still aren't working. And so it's back and forth like that a lot. So
when you're not writing after that 2 to 3 hour period, do you ever get like conference calls where with the people you are writing a story about or working with, and work on that after? Or once you're 2 to 3 hours of writing, are you done for the day?
So it's all different things. So if, let's say I write for a few hours a day, then I'm usually doing like administrative tasks, I guess you can say, for at least a couple hours a day, answering emails, sending contracts for school visits, things like that. Then I'm, reading and researching for other ideas, hopefully coming up, and also doing virtual visits sometimes. So it's a wide variety of stuff. I also have 3 kids, so every free chance I get, I'm spending time with my family too, and doing laundry and making dinner and doing things like that.
What is the hardest part about being an author?
So the hardest part, there's a lot of hard stuff about being an author. It's really hard it can be really easy to get excited about an idea and start a story. It's really hard to keep going when you get stuck and that story idea isn't so new and shiny and exciting anymore. So just sitting in that chair every day and having the discipline to sit there and work on that story for a few hours a day gets really, really hard. And it's also hard when you get criticism. I mean, it's always hard to get, whenever I get that 20-page editorial letter, I let it sit in my email for at least 24 hours, and I'm just like, until I finally get the courage to open it. That's always hard. And when you get bad reviews, or you upset someone with your book or something, that's always hard. There's a lot of hard stuff about being an author, but there's a lot of really good stuff too.
What are some of the easiest things about being an author?
Well, I don't know that there's anything easy about being an author, but there's lots of fulfilling, awesome things. Just because things are hard, doesn't mean you shouldn't do them, right? Sometimes I think the hardest things are the most fulfilling when you do accomplish them. And so some of the best things about being an author are, writing the end at the end of a first draft, because it is really hard to get to that point, and it is a really awesome, just wonderful feeling to finish a book. I think anyone who finishes a book has accomplished something great. And then I really do love doing school visits and meeting my readers and getting to sign their books, and because that helps to keep me motivated and helps to remind me why I do all the hard stuff, because I'm writing my books for these kids, because up until a book gets published, you're just working with adults the whole time. And so you're wondering, are kids even gonna like this when it comes out? Because all you've heard from is adults for a year. And then finally kids start reading it, and it's so awesome for a kid to walk up to you and be like, I loved your book. It's just very, very motivating and affirming about, doing this job, which is really hard.
What are some of those fulfilling moments throughout your journey of writing, or when you publish?
Well, I think the most fulfilling moments are those moments when you hear from kid readers, since I write for kids. So when a kid tells you how much your book meant to them. I get a lot of emails through my website from kids, telling me like what my books meant to them or how they related to them, or when like a parent or someone tells me that my book turned their kid into a reader or something like that. That's really awesome, because I definitely hope to help turn children into readers. And so that whole aspect of it is, I would say, the most fulfilling part of being an author. But also just having that book in the end that you can hold in your hands is so fulfilling. Just knowing this was a ton of work. It was super hard. But now I have this thing that I created that I hope will be around for a really long time.
What is your favorite part about being an author?
Writing the end. Yeah, that is also my favorite. But yeah, so finishing a draft, finishing revision, seeing your book in print for the first time, and meeting readers and hearing from them for the first time about a book. So like Dust has still not been read. It comes out in August. It still has not been read by a single child beyond my own children. And so I'm wondering, how are they going to react to it? So when you hear that first, I love that book, it's like, oh, thank goodness. That's really my favorite part.
Is there a way to pre-order your book that's coming out?
Oh yeah, it's available for pre-order just about anywhere, online or yeah.
What is your least favorite part about being an author?
Least favorite part. So yeah, getting that criticism is really hard, and anybody who creates art and gets criticized probably can relate. It can be very discouraging. I'm easily discouraged, and I come down on myself a lot, and I always feel like with every new book I write, I think I can't do it again. It feels so daunting when you start a new book, and so that part's really hard. I also don't like what's happening right now with me, in that I'm struggling with my next story idea. And so it's hard sometimes to even take your own advice. I give a lot of advice about screen time, and I give a lot of advice about writing methods, and then I don't take any of my own advice for periods of time, and now I'm really struggling. And so I think it's good advice. I just don't take my own good advice, and then I suffer for it.
Is there ever like a time when what are some like advice that you got that you hated when it was first given, but then you thanked them later for it?
Oh my gosh. That's an interesting question. I don't know if I've ever been asked that. Some advice I hated that I got, but okay. I don't know. I've gotten so much advice in this industry. So one of the first things you need to learn as a writer is that when someone criticizes you, instead of getting defensive, or being like, oh, my draft is fine as it is and you don't know anything, really listening to that advice, like really being willing to listen and try to see your story from other people's perspective, because we're so close to our stories and they mean so much to us that when we get sometimes that criticism, we can get super defensive. And so it can be hard. Like, you want to be defensive and be like, no, it's good, it's fine, it's great the way it is, and you're invalidating my whole existence or whatever. So it is hard, but if you can learn to do that and then use that criticism and use it to improve your story and rewrite it and start to try to see it from an outside perspective, then I think you can really succeed as an author. Because I know people who can't take advice, they never could take criticism or advice, and they might do one book and then no one wants to work with them again because they just won't do the revisions and the rewrites, and they cling too hard to their own words, which we do tend to do. They say, in the industry, they say, kill your darlings. That's a common saying. It means you have to learn to cut and take out the things that don't belong, even when they're really special to you. So that's hard. That's super hard. I don't like to do that, but it has to be done.
Is there ever a time when you get a revision and you like their idea from where they're going, but you want to modify it a bit? Do you ever do that?
So I think there's a misconception that in publishing, we send our books to an editor and they make changes to them. That is not how it works at all. We send our draft to an editor, they read it, then they write us a letter. And the letter is something like, one paragraph telling why they love our story, and then 20 pages why it needs improvement. And so in those 20 pages of improvement, it's like, you know, during this part, you know, this character, let's say Dust, Adam, I'm just not understanding, you know, like why he's behaving like this. I don't understand his motivations, or I don't understand this character's motivations. And I feel like the setting wasn't really vivid and all blah, 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 blah. They do not tell you what to do. They just tell you how they feel about what's going on in the story. And then you have to take that and rewrite your story. And so every single word in my books was written by me. There's nothing that goes in there that I do not do myself or approve of. Like if a copy editor is like, oh, this word should be this, everything, I have to approve everything. But yes, there are times I've gotten advice from editors that they felt like a story should, you know, like, well, have you ever thought about doing this with the opening? Oh, like in Dust, I have a great editor, and she's really smart and she's really on point most of the time. But every now and then she said, like, maybe we should start this at the beginning of the school year. And I was just totally set on not starting it at the beginning of the school year and starting it actually more toward the end. And I thought she was wrong, like really wrong on that. And so I did not change that, but I took, you know, I take like 90% of her advice though, but every now and then they don't know everything. And so you have to kind of sometimes just go with your gut and be like, no, I really think that would not improve the story. And so, yeah.
What is your favorite book you've written?
So I get asked that a ton, and it's really hard for me to pick one because our books are all special to us, you know, like children. That's what I always hear authors say. Although I think I do have favorites, not of my children, but of my books. So, I mean, Aven is from the Cactus books. She's a really fun character to write, and I love writing in her voice. She's probably my most natural writing voice, but I don't think the Cactus books are my favorite books, or even my best books by far, actually. I don't think that at all. I really do love The Canyon's Edge, actually, because I just really, really loved writing that book. Once it took me forever to get to the point where I could write it. And then once I did, I loved writing it. I loved working on it. I felt really, really good about it the whole time. I loved doing the research for it. And then the way it got published and everything was really a great experience up until March of 2020, before it came out. But up until that point, it was just really, I loved working on that book. But I'm really excited about Dust too, so I don't know, it's hard to pick one. Across the Desert, you know, that's an example of a book that's like really special to me because Jolene, the main character, is the most like me. She's going through the things I went through, but that book was so painful and horrible to write during the pandemic, and then also the things I was bringing up, and that book just, I can never, I can hardly read a passage out of that book without feeling upset.
Ever have anxiety while writing your books?
Oh yeah, a lot of anxiety, a lot of emotions. Sometimes you cry, and so sometimes you want to like beat your head against the wall. I think writing is kind of an emotional roller coaster, but I think that's what can make writing so good, is because when an author is like really pouring all that they have, you know, all their emotion, all their feelings, when they're really worked up about what they're doing, I think that can make for a really powerful story. So yeah, I feel all the emotions, anger, I laugh sometimes, you know, like you feel all the emotions when you're writing a lot, I think.
In The Canyon's Edge, it started off as like a story where it was the whole paper was a paragraph, and then it almost seemed like it became poems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it changes from prose into verse or poetry, as you call it, and then it goes back to prose at the very, very end. So you want to know how that happened? So when I decided I wanted to write The Canyon's Edge, and I knew Nora, my main character, was going to be alone for most of the book, I sat down and I thought, I don't know how I'm going to write this, because every book I write has tons of dialogue and relationships, and I never wrote a story with a character who was alone. So I said, well, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I'm just going to try. That's the only way writing gets done. And it felt so daunting. And so I sat down and I wrote like one page, and I went, I cannot write this story. Like it's impossible. I can never write this story. And so I put it aside, And also when I told my husband my story idea, he goes, oh, you can't write that story because you will shock your readers. It's so different from your first 3 books. And I was like, yeah, it's a really bad idea. I'm not going to write that book. But I could not stop thinking about that story. And so I have a little like notebook app on my phone. So I'd like I'd be listening to like the Beatles, for example, and I'd pull my car over and I'd like write a little scene that popped into my head, or I'd wake up in the middle of the night and I couldn't stop thinking about Nora, and I'd get up and I'd write a little scene in my notebook app. And like after a year, I realized I had about 10,000 words of notes for this book I could never write. And so luckily my phone didn't die, because that would have been the end of the canyon's edge. So I don't know if I could have gone back. And so then I was like copy and paste, and I emailed myself all those notes. And I realized as I started looking through them and organizing them that they all read kind of like poems. And so that was the first time I thought, what if I wrote this book in verse? Could I write it? But then I'd never even considered doing something like that before. I just knew that I'd read some verse novels and I liked them. So what I did was I went and checked out every book in verse from the library that I could find. And for like a few months, I just read and read and read and read and read and read a bunch of poetry books and read books on craft and all kinds of stuff. And then finally, that's how I learned to write everything. I decided when I was done, I was like, okay, it's time for me to give it a shot. And it actually came out really easily. But then when I sold the book to my publisher and I got that editorial letter, one of the things my editor told me, so the whole thing was in verse. And one of the things my editor told me was, I am not feeling the relationship between Nora and her father in the beginning. Like, it's just, I'm not feeling it at all. And so I was like, okay, she said, maybe if you rewrite the whole opening up to the flood in prose, we can get like to the heart of their relationship, and then you can rewrite the whole thing in verse. And I was like, okay. So I rewrote the whole opening up to the flood in prose, and then I even like stylized it, like where there's a transition where it makes sense and all this sort of stuff. And she just liked that so much that she was like, just leave it in prose. And so, and then I thought, well, this feels like now when they're back together again, which I'm just spoiling my own book, but obviously I mean, come on, I wouldn't kill off my characters, my main characters. I thought it would feel right if it went back to prose. So it's only really in verse from the moment the flood hits all the way through Nora being alone the whole time. And then when she's back in the end with her father, it goes back to prose. But the end is so short, it's only a few pages.
Do you ever get writer's block when you're writing?
Yeah, and I know what causes it. My number one cause of writer's block is my phone, which I was telling them in the presentation earlier. It gives me such a distracted mindset. I can't focus. I can't work. It is the worst. It is my writing kryptonite, which kids will ask me that every now and then. What's your writing kryptonite? Oh, my phone. It's the worst thing for me, but I can't live without it. It's like this horrible relationship I have with my phone.
It's like a love-hate relationship.
Very much, mostly hate. Codependency might be a better description. So I have to get away from screens. I have to get my head into books, and that usually helps a lot. Get back into my research. That's the thing with writer's block, is if I'm working on a story and I'm like, I don't know what to do with this, I have to get out of my phone and I have to go and research what I'm writing about. So right now I'm trying to work out this idea about a boy who is a bull rider. I don't know if it will ever be published. I'm still working on the proposal, and I'm really struggling with certain parts. So what I'm going to do is I'll go to some rodeos, which I've been to a lot in my life, and I'm studying about bull riders, and I'm reading books about bull riding. I read both fiction and nonfiction, because I want to see what other people have done with the idea, because I always want to make sure I'm not doing anything that's too similar, and I get inspiration from other writers, and so that will usually create all kinds of ideas. So the amount of research required for every book is immense, and it leads to a lot of nice little details and parts and things in a story that wouldn't have otherwise been in there without all that research, and it really helps with writer's block.
What does it feel like to be the 2023 Reading Appreciation Program artist?
Oh, well, I'm very honored to have been selected and invited to be that. Yes.
What are some of the classes that you're teaching or leading?
So we're doing a writing workshop tonight called The Importance of Story Goal, which is something I ask myself with every book I write. It's basically about who is your main character and what do they want more than anything in the world, and that is your story goal. And I think a lot of kids don't realize that that should be what's driving your whole story, because I read I'll read samples of kids' stories or read the openings, and it's so much world building, or it's like so much just mundane day-to-day stuff or whatever. I'm like, you've got to get to the point. And I'll ask them, like, who is your main character? This person here, this boy, what do they want? Well, they have autism, they'll tell me, or they have this, or it's usually, or they're dyslexic, which is usually what the child themselves is, which I think is awesome that they're writing stories inspired by their own experiences. But what do they want? I understand they like soccer, they like this, they're dyslexic, they have this. What do they want? And they're like, I don't know. So it's getting to the heart of that. And then so we're doing a workshop on creating vivid settings, which I do love. I love creating settings. And then we're doing a workshop on writing authentic characters, which I also love. Setting and character to me is super, super important. So if story goal is like your plot, then there's setting and there's character. And then we're doing, the final one is for like really serious story writers. It's called Story Beats. And it breaks down the 15 parts to just about every story that you love. And what we do is we take our own story ideas and we try to kind of break them apart and fit them into these 15 beats or these 15 parts. And then by the time, I hope you do that, then you have a fully laid out, well-paced story that you could then write. Now it's all outlined and plotted out for you.
Who is in your writing crew when it comes to being the editor and writing and then your publisher?
It's a lot of people. So I am on my own for the most part up until the point where I write a proposal. Well, with the exception of I will tell my literary agent the ideas I have. Like I'll tell her, I think I want to write a story about a boy who is a bull rider, and she'll be like, oh, okay. And then I'll tell her like a little bit more, and then she'll tell me if she thinks it's a bad idea or if it's a good idea. And then I will write a proposal, which is like it's a synopsis telling my publisher exactly what my story is going to be about from beginning to end. Like I tell them the ending and everything, so I spoil my own book. And then I write about, a few chapters of sample pages, the first few chapters, and then a pitch, and then she goes over it, usually has feedback for me, and then she turns it into my publisher, who I've done this now recently, and they wanted some revisions on the proposal. So now I'm revising that proposal. And then once they accept it and they want to publish my book, I write the first draft, turn it into my editor. And then I'm working usually with that editor and maybe a couple of assistant editors for the next several months as they constantly give me feedback, criticize my book. And I do start with big picture revision, so that big letter where a huge revision is done on big picture stuff, maybe a second one, and then we do line edits, and that could be 2-3 rounds where they're going through and they're just nitpicking every single line in your book, basically like, what does this mean, or this doesn't sound like her, or this is clunky, or whatever. Just literally you go through, it's like 20 comments on each page, just nitpicking every line in your book. And then it goes to copy edits, to the copy editor after that, who goes through and fact checks everything that you've done. And I don't always have the best time with the copy editors. I've had some really nitpicky copy editors who made, like, here's the thing too, I'm writing about Arizona and they're all in New York and have never been to Arizona. And so the Canyon's Edge, for the Canyon's Edge, I'm just gonna outright say this because no one from there is ever gonna see this, but I had the worst copy editor. The copy editing process was so horrible and painful. She would point out every single thing that it was ridiculous. Some of the stuff, like I said, Dad points out a small gopher snake under a rock, and she would write, gopher snakes are not small, they're 3 feet long on average. And it's like, not when they're born. Are you kidding me? Like, it takes years for them to grow that large. Like, or it would be like when Nora's hiding in the cave, 20 feet down on the side of the canyon, and there's a lightning storm or a thunderstorm, whatever you want to call it. And she'd be like, isn't she afraid that the lightning could strike the ground and it could like, go through the ground and go into the cave and electrocute her. I'm like, you think you can travel 20 feet through rock? Like, I don't think that's a concern right now of Norris. She's more concerned about another flood. But it was just incessant stuff like that. I was just like, are you kidding me? And every now and then they will go through the copy editors only, and they'll change a who to a whom or something. So you have to make sure you watch them like a hawk, because I'll be like, Aven would never say whom. That is not how she talks. I understand how to use the word whom, but Aven would never say that. So like they'll try to fix your grammar when it's deliberate, right? So you deliberately have bad grammar because that's how kids talk. And it's like now they talk like all super proper, like totally unnatural sounding. So I think sometimes copy editors don't understand like that we writers would rather have our dialogue sound natural than be grammatically correct, which would sound so, if you were reading a book about kids that was just perfectly grammatically correct, it would sound so awkward and unnatural. It would be tough to read, I think. So it can be tough.
I would like to thank you for joining. I would also like to thank Mr. Steve Ketchum from West Bloomfield Township Public Library for filming, and Miss Nancy Puttress, Miss Cindy Carson, and Mr. Steve Ketchum for working to make today possible. And I will see you at some of your workshops and later today.
Great. Bye.